Hi, my name is Ajaj, and today I'll be rambling about Kate Chopin's The Awakening. This is not really a book review, it's more so just my thoughts on it. I read this about 2 years ago, recently gave it a look through, and I'll read the little thing right here. Written nearly 100 years ago, The Awakening is a compelling story of an extraordinarily modern woman struggling against the constraints of marriage and motherhood, and slowly discovering the power of her own sexuality. Edna's search for her own individuality touches the hearts of women who've learned the value of freedom and happiness, and her story is now regarded as a classic of American fiction. Now, I find this book thoroughly unsatisfying, firstly because there's so many other young white woman having an affair and then a nervous breakdown books that you could read. I don't think it's fully without merit, I just think it's slightly mediocre. First of all, the book sets up a very close friendship between Madame Ratignolle, Adèle Ratignolle I think her name is, and Edna Pontellier, these two women, and definitely frames it like this friendship is going to be something crucial to the plot, like it's not going to completely fade away the second she leaves the island, and hints at something slightly sapphic, which would have been more interesting to read than the Robert love interest that they provide. And so the setting up of that friendship, perhaps it was the time that wasn't too open about this sort of thing, her contemporaries, but at the same time, these hints and these very close friendships between women were not at all uncommon, so I'm not sure what happened there. I find that the setting up of this friendship and the Edna describing her friend with lovely, luscious lips and, the embodiment of female deliciousness is it's disappointing when that eventually leads to nothing, and I think that's the key flaw of this book. It's complete lack of development in a setting that is extremely conducive to that. So you start out with this extremely strong female friendship, and immediately that is lost to the boring little love affair we get to witness. Some scenes are beautifully written. It's lovely prose. The main character falls in love with this man named Robert, and they have a pretty short-winded affair, and I think the paragraphs where they are in love. And there's one passage from this book that did really stick out to me. It's the whole, why do you love him? I love him simply because I do passage, but it's not the most particularly original thing in the whole world either. They're beautifully written, but it certainly isn't anything revolutionary. I think how hopelessly devoted to this affair Edna is understandable, but you have to put in a lot of your own insights as the reader. There's no development, there's no growth, there's no why should we be rooting for either of them. Edna's husband is not abusive, her children are loving. She's got this lovely life, and obviously the yearning for freedom is not at all unjust, but I think Chopin does a pretty awful job at showing us why is she trying to run from this. And I think, as a reader, it's easy to imagine all of these silent, invisible pressures, and maybe that speaks a lot, but I think that there was definitely a lot more room for elaboration there. I would make the argument that if you are interested in this kind of nervous white woman has a mental breakdown, which is my guilty pleasure genre of literature, it's not the best read. There's many better things to read out there, but if you are looking for a little bit of a glimpse into this genre or a little bit of a dip into what life in this century was like, it's a fine book. It's a short read. There's beautiful passages, and I think it's a book that I believe had the standard for it set very high, and now reading it with a modern lens and seeing all the stuff after this that touches the same themes is pretty interesting, although I can also hardly call it revolutionary with the type of literature that had already surfaced at the time. Maybe this sounds snobby. Don't worry, I like a lot of books. I think the one thing I have to say to Kate Chopin is, really, this again? When do we not write about this? When do we not write about these women who find themselves and then go drown themselves or hurt themselves? It's so lackluster, I think, in the depth of the novel that she gives us, especially because she drowns herself. I mean, it's almost cliche. It is very cliche. I do take that back. And I think I can definitely think of some other recommendations of books, even in this time period, or even a tiny bit later with Simone de Beauvoir, who elaborate on relationships better, who show better character development, insights into the psyche. I think if you are a writer and you are looking to emulate this era and the feelings of a whirlwind affair and the kind of uncertainty of a mental state of this protagonist, it's great prose to look into. But then again, as with all reading, writing becomes a slippery slope of emulation. So overall, a good book. A mediocre book for those who expected the same as its other Nervous White Woman Has Breakdown counterparts, but definitely not a waste of time if you are not particularly familiar with this genre.